When Nipsey Hussle died, Los Angeles didn't just mourn. The city threw a $2 million farewell that stopped traffic for miles, filled one of the biggest arenas in the country, and made history that the culture is still talking about today. Behind that number is a story most people have completely wrong, and the truth is bigger than the rumor. We're about to break down exactly what happened, where the money went, and why Nipsey's funeral became something no rapper had ever been given before. Yo, what's good, fam? Today, we're going deep into the story behind Nipsey Hussle's legendary $2 million funeral. The venue, the ceremony, the procession, the casket, and the truth behind that number everybody keeps throwing around, but nobody's actually explained. To understand why Nipsey Hussle's funeral became what it became, you first have to understand who Nipsey Hussle was. Not just the rapper, not just the man on the album cover. The full picture. Ermias Joseph Asghedom was born on August 15, 1985 in Los Angeles, California. He grew up in Crenshaw, deep in the neighborhood that would define his identity, his music, and ultimately his mission. He came up in the streets. That's documented, that's real. But what set Nipsey apart from the beginning was that he never let the streets become the ceiling. He let them become the foundation. His music career started building momentum in the mid-2000s through a series of mixtapes. Slauson Boy, Bullets Ain't Got No Name, The Marathon Continues, that earned him a grassroots following in Los Angeles before the internet had fully taken over the industry. He was doing things independently, pressing CDs, moving product, understanding the economics of the music business at a time when most artists were still waiting for a label to validate them. He studied ownership. He studied distribution. He looked at the way the music industry extracted value from artists and decided he was going to build a model where the value stayed with him. When he eventually released Crenshaw in 2013 and sold it for $100 a copy, people thought it was a stunt. It wasn't. Jay-Z bought 100 copies. Russell Simmons bought copies. That was Nipsey understanding his own value before the mainstream did, and using the mainstream's attention to prove his point. By the time Victory Lap dropped in February 2018, his major label debut, his Grammy-nominated album, Nipsey had already built something that most rappers never build. He owned his masters. He owned his store. He had invested in real estate, technology, and businesses along Crenshaw Boulevard. His Marathon clothing store wasn't just a retail location. It was a statement. It said that the people who grew up in this neighborhood deserved to own a piece of it. He partnered with the city of Los Angeles. He funded coding classes for young people in his community. He was in the middle of a meeting with LAPD officials to discuss gang intervention programs on the very day that his life was taken. That's who Nipsey Hussle was. That's why the world stopped when he died. March 31st, 2019. A Sunday afternoon, Nipsey was outside the Marathon clothing store at 3420 West Slauson Avenue when he was shot multiple times in the parking lot. He was rushed to the hospital. He was pronounced dead at 3:55 in the afternoon. He was 33 years old.
Well, at this hour of the music world, mourning the death of Grammy-nominated rapper, entrepreneur, and philanthropist Nipsey Hussle, the 33-year-old shot and killed outside of his clothing store yesterday in Los Angeles. ABC 7's Carl Willis standing by at the live desk with tributes that are pouring in for the musician who inspired millions. Carl?
The news hit the internet like a shockwave. Social media collapsed under the weight of it. Artists who had worked with him, artists who had never met him, athletes, politicians, fans, and people who had never listened to a single song but understood what he represented in the culture. They all came forward in the hours that followed. The grief was immediate, and it was massive, and it was real. Los Angeles grieved publicly. The country grieved with it. Eric Holder was arrested 2 days later and eventually convicted of first-degree murder. But in those first hours and days, the city was still processing the loss. Vigils broke out across Los Angeles. People gathered outside the Marathon store and stood there for hours. Some in silence, some in tears, some playing his music from their phones into the open air. They gathered at parks and intersections throughout South Central, laying flowers and candles and marathon gear at makeshift memorials that stretched for blocks. The grief spread far beyond Los Angeles. Artists from every corner of hip-hop posted tributes. Athletes, actors, and politicians weighed in. The scale of the public response made one thing immediately clear: a private service was never going to be enough. Within days, it became clear that a private service was not going to be enough. The scale of the outpouring demanded something bigger, something that matched the scale of what Nipsey had built and who he had been. His family and the people around him began planning a public memorial, and the conversation about where to hold it came down to one question: what venue in Los Angeles is large enough for what this needs to be? The answer was Staples Center. Now known as Crypto.com Arena, Staples Center sits in downtown Los Angeles and carries a capacity of approximately 21,000 people. It is the home of the Lakers. It is the building where Kobe Bryant had his jersey retired. It is one of the most recognizable arenas in the world, and it was the only venue in the city that could come close to holding the demand that existed for Nipsey Hussle's public memorial. The service was scheduled for April 11, 2019, 11 days after his death. Organizers made the decision to distribute tickets free of charge. The public line for those tickets stretched beyond anything the arena had seen. Hundreds of thousands of people attempted to access tickets through Ticketmaster when they went live, and the system buckled under the traffic. 21,000 seats were allocated for the public. The demand was estimated to be exponentially higher. Security logistics for an event of this scale require coordination between private security, the Los Angeles Police Department, and the arena's own operations team. Guests arriving at Staples Center that morning encountered one of the most tightly organized memorial services the city had ever executed. But inside the building, what they found wasn't cold or corporate. It was warm. It was community. The arena had been transformed into something that felt like both a church and a celebration. Floral arrangements covered the stage. A portrait of Nipsey stood at the center. The crowd, 21,000 people who had come from every part of the city and every part of the country, filled the seats and waited in a silence that carried the weight of something historic. The ceremony opened with a prayer. Nipsey's pastor, Dr. J. Edgar Boyd of First AME Church in Los Angeles, set the tone for what was to come. From the first moments of the service, it was clear this was not going to be a performance. It was going to be a reckoning. One of the most powerful moments of the entire memorial came in the form of a letter. Former President Barack Obama, who had met with Nipsey and admired his work in the community, sent a written tribute that was read aloud inside the arena. The letter, read by activist Sharice Bremen Weaver, described Nipsey as someone who, quote, spoke for a community that is too often ignored. It acknowledged his work reducing gang violence and investing in a neighborhood he grew up in. Obama wrote that Michelle joined him in sending thoughts to Nipsey's family, and that his work and the work of those he inspired would continue to speak for itself. When those words filled the arena, the response from 21,000 people was visceral. People who had never been in the same room as a former president felt addressed, felt acknowledged, felt like the world had finally confirmed something they had known all along about the man they were mourning. Stevie Wonder took the stage and performed, his voice carrying through the building in a way that seemed to slow time. His presence at the memorial was a testament to the generational reach of Nipsey's impact. Here was a living legend who felt called to show up for a 33-year-old rapper from Crenshaw because that rapper had understood something timeless about dignity and purpose. Jhené Aiko performed a tribute that drew tears across the arena. Her delivery was quiet and devastating in the best way, the kind of musical moment that people who were there will describe for the rest of their lives. Snoop Dogg spoke. Nipsey's relationship with Snoop went back to the neighborhood, back to Crenshaw, back to a shared understanding of what it meant to come from that specific corner of Los Angeles, and then try to give something back to it. Snoop's remarks carried grief, but also pride, the kind of pride that comes from watching someone from your world become something larger than anyone expected. Lauren London stood before 21,000 people and spoke about the man she loved. Her presence was devastating not because of any dramatic gesture, but because of its simplicity. She was a woman who had lost her partner, standing up in front of the world, carrying herself with a composure that itself became a tribute to what Nipsey represented. She described him as a protector and a provider, a man who moved through the world with intention. The arena was silent in a way that rooms full of 21,000 people almost never are. Members of Nipsey's family spoke. Nipsey's brother, Samil Gatem, known as Black Sam, was present throughout the ceremony, as was Nipsey's father, Dawud Gatem, who had immigrated from Eritrea years earlier. Nipsey always spoke about his Eritrean heritage with pride, and his presence was felt throughout the service. His daughter Imani and his son Kros, whom he shared with Lauren London, were there. The weight of that image, two children old enough to understand that something enormous and irreversible had happened, settled over everything. The ceremony lasted for hours. When it concluded, the arena emptied slowly, people reluctant to let the space dissolve back into ordinary life. But the day was not over. What followed the memorial was something that no one in Los Angeles had seen in a long time, if ever. The funeral procession that carried Nipsey Hussle through South Los Angeles covered approximately 25 miles. The route was deliberate. It passed through the neighborhoods that built him: Crenshaw, Hyde Park, Inglewood, Leimert Park. It passed by the Marathon clothing store on Slauson. It wound through streets that he had walked as a child and invested in as a man. Every turn in that route was a sentence in a biography, written in asphalt and storefronts, and the faces of the people who lined the sidewalks. And the people were there. They were there in numbers that nobody quite anticipated, even given everything that had already happened that day. Estimates placed the crowd along the procession route at more than 100,000 people. 100,000 people standing on the sidewalks of South Los Angeles to watch a hearse carry Nipsey Hussle through the community he spent his life building up. People climbed trees. People stood on the roofs of buildings. People lined overpasses and freeway on-ramps. Parents held children on their shoulders. Old men who had known the neighborhood for decades stood quietly with their hands over their hearts. Young men who had grown up listening to Nipsey's music stood together in groups and wept openly without embarrassment. The procession moved slowly enough that the crowd could take it in, that the moment could breathe. News helicopters circled overhead, broadcasting the scene live across local and national television. Cameras on the ground captured faces in the crowd: grandmothers in Sunday clothes, teenagers who had printed out pictures of Nipsey and taped them to their shirts, business owners who had closed early and stepped outside to stand with their neighborhood. The footage from that procession, watched by millions online in the days that followed, documented something that felt almost impossible to quantify: an entire community expressing grief as a single unified act. At certain intersections, the silence gave way to applause. At others, people called out his name. Some held up signs, some held up phones. Some simply stood still and watched as the procession rolled past, as if they understood that this was one of those moments that doesn't come twice, that the city was performing a ritual of mourning and respect that will be talked about for generations. Organizers had intentionally routed the procession through the heart of Nipsey's community for exactly this reason. This was not a private grief being managed behind closed doors. This was a community publicly claiming its love for one of its own. It was South Los Angeles saying, with 100,000 bodies lining the street, that this man belonged to us and we are not going to let that pass quietly. Now, real talk, in the middle of all of this, people started asking questions about the specifics of the funeral itself, the casket, the cost, the details that tend to circulate whenever a public figure is memorialized on this scale. And one of the details that got the most traction online was the casket that Nipsey Hussle was laid to rest in. A casket chosen for Nipsey's burial was a solid bronze model known as the Sarasota. This is a casket that has been widely reported to cost approximately $25,000, featuring a polished exterior and a white velvet interior. It is a high-end model, one associated with elaborate funerals for public figures of significant cultural stature. And the detail that amplified public fascination with it was the connection to Michael Jackson. Reports widely circulated that the same model, the solid bronze Sarasota, was used for Michael Jackson's funeral in 2009. Whether that comparison was entirely accurate in every specification is something that varies depending on the source, but the connection landed with enormous cultural weight. Here was a man from Crenshaw being given a send-off that drew a line, however symbolic, to one of the greatest entertainers who ever lived. The imagery mattered to people. It felt like it matched the scale of the moment. The elegance of the casket, the grandeur of the venue, the 100,000 people in the streets, taken together, they created a farewell that felt commensurate with the life. And that is when the $2 million figure started spreading. Let's break this down, fam, because this is important. The claim that Nipsey Hussle's funeral cost $2 million is one of the most repeated pieces of information connected to his passing. It shows up in comment sections. It gets cited in YouTube videos. People reference it as a statement about how massive and expensive the ceremony was. But when you trace the origin of that figure, the picture that emerges is more complicated than a simple price tag. The $2 million number that circulates in online discussions does not appear to originate from any verified accounting of the memorial's actual cost. There is no publicly confirmed breakdown from the family, from event organizers, or from venue management that places the total funeral cost at $2 million. What the figure more likely traces back to is the initial estimated valuation of Nipsey Hussle's estate following his death, a number that was reported in connection with his estate and the legal proceedings that followed, particularly the public debate over guardianship of his children and the management of his assets. In the weeks and months after his passing, there were significant legal proceedings involving the administration of his estate. His assets, including the Marathon clothing, his music rights, his real estate holdings, and various business interests, were valued for legal purposes, and those estate figures entered public conversation through court filings and media reporting. As that information spread through social media, the framing around it shifted, and the estate valuation figure became conflated with the cost of the funeral itself in popular discussion. This is how misinformation operates in the internet age. A number gets attached to a story. The story travels faster than the nuance. By the time the nuance catches up, the number has already become the narrative. The $2 million funeral became a fixture of Nipsey Hussle's legacy online, not because anyone verified it as a funeral cost, but because the scale of the ceremony made it feel plausible, and the internet did the rest. The actual cost of the memorial, venue, logistics, security, production, floral arrangements, transportation, were never publicly disclosed in their entirety. What is known is that the funeral was funded in part by those closest to Nipsey, and that it was organized with the help of people in the entertainment and business community who wanted to honor him properly. But the specific dollar figure that would make the phrase true in the way people use it simply does not exist in any verified public record. What is verifiable is the scale. What is verifiable is the impact. And what is verifiable is where Nipsey was finally laid to rest. After the procession, after the crowds along 25 miles of Los Angeles streets finally began to disperse, Nipsey Hussle was buried at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in the Hollywood Hills. Forest Lawn is one of the most significant and storied memorial parks in the country. It is the final resting place of Michael Jackson, Carrie Fisher, Bette Davis, and dozens of other cultural figures who shaped American entertainment across generations. Its grounds cover more than 300 acres and are maintained with a level of care that reflects the significance of those interred there. The burial itself was private, only family and close friends present, a quiet moment after the enormous public day that had preceded it. That contrast was intentional. The public memorial at Staples Center, the procession through South Los Angeles, those were gifts to the community, to the city, to the culture. The burial was for the people who loved Ermias Asghedom, the man. His memorial marker bears both names, Ermias Asghedom and Nipsey Hussle, acknowledging the full dimension of who he was. A man with a family name, a heritage, a father and a brother and children, and a name he chose for himself that became one of the most recognized in hip-hop. In the years since his death, the gravesite at Forest Lawn has become a place of remembrance. Fans make the trip. They leave flowers and marathon gear and handwritten notes. The site is maintained with respect and the cemetery has managed a consistent public interest with care. But even as the gravesite draws visitors, the most visible continuing presence of Nipsey's legacy exists not in a cemetery, but on the street corner he claimed. The Marathon clothing store on Slauson has remained open. Black Sam, Samil Asghedom, has continued to steward Nipsey's estate and brand with the same philosophy Nipsey operated by: ownership, independence, community investment. The two brothers built that store together. Black Sam was there when Nipsey was pressing CDs out of the trunk of a car, and he was there when Nipsey turned Slauson into a destination. That history means the stewardship hasn't felt like management. It has felt like continuation. The store has expanded its presence and footprint. The brand has extended into new merchandise and collaborations that stay true to what Nipsey stood for. Nipsey's music catalog has also grown in cultural significance in the years since his death, with Victory Lap continuing to move numbers, and his earlier mixtapes receiving renewed attention from younger listeners discovering him for the first time. The estate has been deliberate about how his image and music are licensed and extended, protecting the integrity of what he built in the same way he protected it while he was alive. The mission that Nipsey laid out has not stalled because he is gone. It has, in certain respects, grown more visible. The phrase that Nipsey lived by, "the marathon continues," has taken on a weight since his death that it never quite had while he was alive, in the way that the deaths of great people sometimes clarify what they were saying all along. The marathon he was running wasn't just about his own success. It was about proving that the people from South Los Angeles deserved to own things, to build things, to see their neighborhood as a place of possibility rather than limitation. His funeral reflected that philosophy in his architecture. The choice of Staples Center, an arena associated with championship, with legacy, with spectacle, said something about how the people who loved him saw his life. The procession through his community said something about who he belonged to. The private burial at Forest Lawn said something about the man underneath the legacy. The conversation about the memorial in the years since has expanded beyond grief into something that functions almost like study. People go back to the footage of the service and find new things in it. They rewatch Lauren London's words and notice something different depending on where they are in their own lives. They think about what Barack Obama's letter meant coming from a former president who did not owe that gesture to anyone, and they think about what it says that Obama felt compelled to write it. They think about Stevie Wonder choosing to be in that room, choosing to perform for a 33-year-old from Crenshaw the way you perform for a Titan, because that is what the moment called for. They think about Snoop, who has performed at his share of big stages, standing at a podium and choosing his words carefully because some rooms demand that. And they think about 100,000 people standing on the sidewalks of South Los Angeles in silence, choosing to be present for something that required nothing from them except their time and their witness. What you find when you look at Nipsey Hussle's funeral clearly is that the $2 million question, whatever the origin of that figure, is almost beside the point. The cost of the ceremony, whether it was $100,000 or $500,000 or something else entirely, doesn't explain why it became what it became. The reason it became one of the most significant public memorials in hip-hop history has nothing to do with what anybody spent. It became what it became because the man it honored had spent years investing in the people around him. He had given his neighborhood something to be proud of. He had given young people from Crenshaw a living example that ownership was possible, that you didn't have to wait for permission to build something. And when he was taken from that community without warning, without reason that made any sense, the response was proportionate to the investment. 100,000 people don't line the streets for someone they didn't know. They line the streets for someone who showed up for them first. That is the only accurate accounting of what happened in Los Angeles on April 11th, 2019. Not the venue cost, not the casket price, not the estate valuation that got turned into a funeral headline. The real number that matters is 100,000. That's how many people chose to stand outside on a Thursday afternoon in April and bear witness to something. That's the number that tells you who Nipsey Hussle was and what he meant to the city that raised him. The marathon, as he always said, continues. And years from now, when people try to explain to their children or their grandchildren what Nipsey Hussle meant to Los Angeles, to hip-hop, to a generation of young people who needed to see someone from their neighborhood prove that ownership was possible, they will probably start with the music. And then they will describe a Thursday in April when the city stood still, when 21,000 people filled an arena and 100,000 more lined 25 miles of streets. When the president wrote a letter and Stevie Wonder sang and Lauren London stood up in front of the world and held herself together because the man she loved had always stood up too. The farewell they gave him was worthy of the race he ran.